Chosen ones, listen closely. The whole time you thought no one saw you struggling, someone did. The whole time you thought you survived on nothing but stubbornness and luck, someone was quietly making sure luck had help. Not loud help, not the kind that takes a bow, the kind that moves through your life like a current under still water, felt but never seen, real but never named. He's been watching over you since day one. He just never said it. Let that sink in, because it changes everything you thought you understood about your own story. Before we go further, hit like, hit subscribe, and let that be your small offering back to whatever has been carrying you this far without asking for credit. Not because it's owed anything, because gratitude, even quiet gratitude, has a way of reaching the people who need to feel it. Here's the part that's going to sting a little before it heals. You spent years thinking you were unguarded. You mistook silence for absence. You mistook invisible protection for no protection at all. And that misunderstanding cost you peace you didn't have to lose. Because a shield doesn't have to announce itself to work. A guardian doesn't have to introduce himself to be real. And the fact that you never saw his hand doesn't mean his hand wasn't there, catching things before they ever reached you. Think about how many nights you replayed your own failures, looking for someone to blame, and the name that never once crossed your mind was his, because he was never in the room the way you'd recognize a person being in a room. He was in the outcome. He was in the version of the story that didn't happen. You can't see a disaster that got quietly rerouted. You can only see the calm afterward and call it a normal day. Most of your normal days were not as normal as you assumed. You were never as alone as the silence made you feel. Someone has been watching over you since day one. And chosen one, he never once asked you to notice. That's the whole point. That's what makes it real. And maybe that's the hardest thing to sit with right now, harder than any single memory we're about to walk through. Not that you were protected, but that you spent so long believing the opposite, building an entire identity around the idea that nobody had your back, that every win was clawed out of nothing, that every survival was a solo act performed for no audience at all. That belief shaped how you trust people. It shaped how slow you are to accept help, even now. It shaped the quiet exhaustion you carry into rooms where you're expected to hold everything together by yourself. None of that was wrong to feel. It just wasn't the whole truth. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why the whole truth waited this long to reach you. Number 1, the first time he noticed you. Every protector has a beginning, a first moment when something in you caught his attention and refused to let go. It wasn't a grand entrance. It wasn't a dramatic rescue. It was smaller than that, quieter than that, and exactly because of how small it was, it mattered more than anything loud ever could. Think back. There was a version of you, younger, rawer, still figuring out how to carry weight you didn't ask for. Nobody was clapping for you then. Nobody was writing your name down as someone to watch. You were just a kid, or a young adult, or a person doing their best in rooms that didn't care whether you made it or not. And in one of those rooms, at one of those moments, someone paused. Someone looked a second longer than they needed to. Someone saw the way you kept going, even when nobody told you that you were allowed to stop. That's where it started. Not with a promise, not with a conversation, with a decision made in silence by someone who never told you he made it. Imagine this. A lighthouse doesn't ask the ships if they want its light. It doesn't wait for gratitude before it turns. It simply decides, once, that darkness will not be the last word for anyone passing through its water. That decision, made once, repeats itself every single night without needing to be renewed. That's what happened the day he noticed you. He didn't decide to help you today. He decided to help you for as long as it took. And he never once revisited that decision to see if you'd earned it again. You might ask yourself, why me? Why would someone choose to carry a weight like that for someone who didn't even know they were carrying it? Because protectors like this don't choose people who look strong. They choose people who keep moving without strength, because that's the rarer thing. Anyone can rise when the wind is behind them. Almost no one keeps rising when the wind refuses to move at all. He saw you doing the second thing, and something in him said, "This one doesn't get to fall. Not on my watch." He watched how you handled disappointment without becoming bitter. He watched how you kept showing up to people who didn't show up for you. He watched the nights you sat alone with a weight you never explained to anyone, and he watched you carry it anyway, without letting it turn you cruel. That's rare. That's the kind of rare that makes quiet people pay attention. You didn't perform for him. You didn't know he was watching. And that's exactly why it counted. Because the version of you he chose to protect wasn't the version built for an audience. It was the real one, the tired one, the one who kept walking when walking made no sense. There's a difference between being seen and being witnessed. Being seen is what happens when you're trying. Being witnessed is what happens when you've stopped trying to be seen at all, and someone catches the truth of you anyway, in the unguarded moment, in the version of you that exists when no one's supposed to be looking. That's the version he found, not the polished one, the honest one. And once something honest is witnessed like that, it doesn't get forgotten, it gets followed. That first notice planted something that never left. From that point forward, whether you knew it or not, you were being watched over by someone who had already made up his mind about you before you'd made up your mind about yourself. And here's what most people never think to ask. What happens to a decision like that over time? Does it fade the way most decisions do, worn down by distance or by the passage of years? Not this one. Decisions made about who you're willing to quietly stand behind don't erode with time the way casual opinions do. If anything, they harden. Every year you kept walking without knowing you were being walked alongside, only confirmed what he saw in the beginning. You weren't a maybe. From that first notice forward, you were a certainty he simply never announced. Number 2, the danger that never reached you. You've had close calls. Everyone has. Moments that should have gone worse than they did. Situations that were lined up to break you and somehow didn't quite connect. You called it luck. You called it timing. Chosen one, some of it was neither. Think about the times you walked away from something that should have wrecked you, and instead it just grazed you. The relationship that ended right before it would have cost you everything. The opportunity that fell through, and only later did you understand it would have trapped you somewhere far worse. The situation that felt like the end of the world in the moment and turned out, months later, to be the exact thing that redirected you towards something better. You don't build a life like that by accident every single time. At some point, repetition stops being coincidence and starts being pattern. And a pattern like that usually has a hand behind it. Imagine this: a parent walking slightly behind a child learning to ride a bike. Hand hovering an inch from the seat, never grabbing unless the fall is about to be real. The child feels free. The child thinks they're doing this completely on their own. They don't see the hand hovering there, ready. They only feel the wind, the speed, the pride of staying upright. That's what real protection looks like from the inside. It doesn't feel like protection. It feels like independence. It feels like the absence of a net, right up until the one moment the net was needed and it was already there. That's what's been happening around you. Danger that should have landed square in your chest, instead brushed past you like it lost its aim at the last second. And chosen one, things don't lose their aim by accident that many times in a row. You might be asking why the worst version of certain moments never actually happened to you. Why the accident missed. Why the betrayal came out before it cost you everything. Why the collapse always seemed to stop just short of total. Because someone was quietly softening the blows before they landed, not erasing your struggle completely, because struggle is part of how you were meant to grow. Just making sure the struggle never became the ending. This is the part that's hard to accept, because it means some of what you survived, you didn't fully survive alone. Some of what almost destroyed you was already being managed by hands you never saw. That's not a knock against your strength. Your strength is real. It's just that your strength had backup the entire time, and nobody bothered to tell you. Think of every version of the worst-case scenario that ran through your head at 3 a.m. and never actually arrived. Not because you talked yourself out of fear with logic, but because the thing your fear was pointed at had already been quietly disarmed somewhere upstream, before it ever got close enough for you to feel its full weight. You only ever fought the shadow of the danger. Somebody else had already handled the source. He never wanted credit for it. That's not why he did it. He did it because somewhere along the way, he decided you were worth the effort of intervening quietly, again and again, without ever needing you to know his name. Number 3. The coincidences that were never coincidences. You've had a list of them. Everyone who's lived long enough has one. The person who showed up in exactly the right week. The message that arrived at exactly the moment you needed it most. The random conversation that somehow answered a question you never asked out loud. You filed those under coincidence because coincidence is easier to believe than the alternative. The alternative means someone was paying closer attention to your life than you were. Let's actually look at it instead of filing it away. How many times has the right person appeared at the exact right moment, not a day early, not a day late? How many times has information you needed simply landed in front of you without you searching for it? How many times has a stranger said one sentence that rearranged your entire week and then disappeared from your life completely, having done exactly what they needed to do and nothing more? Coincidence doesn't usually work with that kind of precision. Coincidence is sloppy. Coincidence misses more than it hits. What you've experienced isn't sloppy, it's aimed. Imagine this: a chess player who has already seen the next 15 moves before making the first one. From where you're sitting, at ground level, each move looks random, disconnected, unrelated to the last. From above the board, every single one connects into a single line, leading exactly where it was always meant to go. You've been playing your life from ground level. He's been watching it from above the board the entire time, nudging pieces into place, long before you understood there was a board at all. You might wonder why certain people came into your life exactly when you needed them and left exactly when their purpose was done. Why certain information reached you right before a decision that would have gone wrong without it. Why certain paths opened the moment you were finally ready to walk them and not one day sooner. Because timing like that isn't random. Timing like that is coordinated. He never needed you to notice the coordination. In fact, the less you noticed, the better it worked. Because the moment protection becomes visible, people start performing for it instead of living honestly in front of it. He wanted you unfiltered. He wanted the real version of your struggle, your growth, your doubt. So he stayed invisible on purpose, letting every coincidence do its quiet work, while you kept believing you were simply lucky. There's a version of you that could have gone looking for meaning in every one of these moments the day they happened. Could have stopped and asked out loud who arranged this. And maybe you did ask, quietly, and got no answer, and moved on assuming the question didn't matter. It mattered. You just weren't meant to get the answer yet. Some questions are only answered in hindsight, once enough of them have piled up to form an unmistakable shape. You weren't lucky, you were covered. And the coincidences you've been collecting your whole life were never random at all. They were signatures. His signature, written across your story in a hand you were never meant to recognize until now. Go back through your own timeline right now, quietly, in your head, and count them. Not to prove anything to anyone else, just for you. The friend who reached out on the one day you needed a friend the most. The job posting you weren't even looking for that landed in front of you at the exact right week. The stranger's comment that somehow answered the exact question keeping you up at night. Individually, Each one looks like nothing. Stacked together across years, they stop looking like nothing and start looking like a signature you're only now learning how to read. Number 4. The doors that opened without explanation. Some doors in your life opened so easily, it almost felt suspicious. You expected a fight and got a welcome instead. You expected rejection and got a yes you didn't see coming. You prepared yourself for a battle over something, and then the battle simply never came. You called it a good day. Chosen one. It was more than a good day. Doors like that don't usually swing open on their own. Somewhere behind them, someone had already had a conversation you weren't in the room for. Someone had already vouched for you before you ever walked in to introduce yourself. Someone had already decided, quietly, that this particular obstacle wasn't going to be allowed to stop you. Think about the job that came through when you'd nearly given up. The person who said yes when every signal told you they'd say no. The situation that should have taken months of struggle and instead resolved itself in days. You stood there confused, relieved, maybe even a little suspicious of your own good fortune, because deep down, some part of you knew this wasn't how things usually went for you. Imagine this: a traveler walking toward a locked gate, expecting to be turned away. And just before their hand touches the latch, someone on the other side, someone they'll never meet, quietly slides the bolt open and steps back into the shadows before the traveler even arrives. The traveler walks through, amazed at their luck, never knowing the gate was never locked at all by the time they got there. That's what impossible doors feel like from the inside. Impossible, right up until the second they aren't. You might ask why some paths that should have cost you years only cost you months. Why some people who should have blocked you instead stepped aside without explanation. Why obstacles that looked permanent turned out to be temporary the moment you were finally ready to move past them. Because someone was clearing ground you didn't even know needed clearing. And here's the detail most people miss when they tell this kind of story. Not every door that opened for you was the door you were praying for. Some of the doors you begged to open stayed shut, and you resented that for a long time. Maybe you still do. But look at where you are now, and look at what was behind those doors that never opened. Some of them led nowhere good. He didn't just open the right doors, he kept the wrong ones sealed, even while you pounded on them, because the version of you praying at the wrong door didn't yet know it was the wrong door. He never explained it to you, and he never will, because explaining it would turn protection into a transaction. And what he's been doing for you was never meant to be a transaction. It was meant to be exactly what it looks like now that you're finally seeing it. A door, quietly unlocked, long before you ever knew to be afraid of it being closed. Number 5. Why he chose silence instead of applause. Here's the part that might frustrate you a little, and that's fair. If someone has been protecting you this whole time, why didn't he just say something? Why the years of silence? Why let you carry the belief that you were unguarded when one sentence could have eased so much of the weight? Because the moment he spoke, everything would have changed, and not for the better. The second protection becomes visible. It stops teaching you how to stand on your own. You would have leaned on the knowledge of him instead of building the muscle of yourself. And he didn't want you dependent on a safety net. He wanted you capable, with or without one. Think about what would have happened if you'd known from day one that someone powerful had your back, no matter what. Would you have taken the same risks that shaped you? Would you have pushed through the same hard years that built your character? Or would you have coasted, safe in the knowledge that someone else would catch every fall before it hurt? Real growth doesn't happen in guaranteed safety. It happens in uncertainty survived. And he needed you to survive the uncertainty honestly, not because he doubted you, but because he believed you could. Imagine this: a teacher standing at the back of a swimming pool, close enough to reach a struggling student in half a second, but staying silent, staying still, letting the student believe they are swimming completely alone. The student panics for a moment, flails, then finds the rhythm on their own. The teacher never announces their presence, because the moment they do, the student stops trusting their own arms and starts trusting the teacher's hands instead. That's what silence like this actually protects. Not just your body, your belief in your own strength. Think about how differently you'd talk about your own hardest years if you'd known someone was catching the parts that would have actually broken you. You'd probably tell the story smaller. You'd probably shrug at things you should be proud of, because you'd assume the outcome was always guaranteed instead of genuinely earned. His silence is the reason your story gets to be yours, not borrowed, not asterisked. Earned in every place that matters, even if it was quietly supported in the places that would have been unsurvivable. You might wonder why he let you feel so alone for so long if he was always right there. Because feeling alone and being alone are two very different things, and only one of them was ever true for you. He let you feel the weight, so you'd build the strength to carry weight. But he never let the weight actually crush you. That line, thin as it is, was drawn and held by him the entire time. Silence wasn't neglect. Silence was the exact shape his care needed to take so that yours could grow into something real. Before we go further, if you can feel even a little of this settling into your chest right now, drop 77 in the comments. Not as luck, not as superstition, as a signal that says you're still here, still listening, still willing to see the parts of your life you were never shown directly. Number 6. The people who protected you without knowing why. Not every hand that protected you belonged to him directly. Some of it moved through other people. People who had no idea why they suddenly felt compelled to help you, defend you, or step in at exactly the right moment. They thought it was their own decision. In some ways it was. But something nudged that decision into place at a moment when it mattered most. Think about the stranger who spoke up for you when nobody else would. The co-worker who vouched for your character when your name was being dragged through a room you weren't in. The teacher, the mentor, the almost forgotten acquaintance who said one sentence in your defense and then disappeared from your life. Their part in your story complete. They didn't know they were instruments. They just felt something in the moment and acted on it. That's how real protection often moves. Not always directly. Sometimes it moves through other people the same way wind moves through trees, bending branches that never asked to be bent, using paths that were already there to carry something further than it could have traveled alone. Imagine this, a single spark landing in dry grass on a still day. It shouldn't spread anywhere without wind, but somewhere, unseen, a breeze picks up at exactly the right second and carries that spark exactly where it needed to go before dying down again completely. The people who helped you were the breeze. They didn't choose to be the wind. They just happened to blow in the right direction at the right time, and neither they nor you ever fully understood why. If you go back through your life and count the people who helped you at real cost to themselves, people who had nothing obvious to gain and plenty to lose, you'll find more of them than you expect. And most of them, if you asked them today why they did it, would struggle to give you a clean answer. They'd say something like, "I don't know, it just felt right," or "I just couldn't let that happen to you." That vagueness isn't a weakness in the story. It's the clearest evidence there is. People rarely help strangers at a cost with that much conviction, unless something is moving through them that's bigger than the moment itself. You might wonder why certain people who barely knew you went out of their way to help you when it cost them something to do it. Why people with nothing to gain still chose to defend you in rooms where defending you was inconvenient. Because something moved through them in that moment. Something bigger than a personal opinion about you. Call it instinct. Call it conscience. Call it a nudge they'll never be able to explain, even if you asked them directly. You were never protected by one hand alone. You were protected by a network of hands, most of which never knew they were part of anything at all. And the one coordinating that network from behind the scenes never asked for credit from a single one of them. Think about what that means for how you see the people around you now. Some of them were never given credit, not by you, not by anyone, for the exact moment they stepped in and quietly changed the direction of your life. You may never get the chance to thank them properly, because half of them don't remember doing it, and the other half never realized it mattered as much as it did. That's fine. They weren't doing it for the thanks. They were doing it because, for one unexplainable moment, something bigger than them moved through the choice they made, and they said yes, without needing to understand why. Number 7. The attacks that collapsed before they landed. Somewhere in your life, someone tried to take you down, and it simply didn't work the way they expected. The rumor that should have destroyed your reputation fizzled out before it spread far enough to matter. The plan someone built specifically to undercut you fell apart in a way that made no logical sense, given the effort they put into it. You noticed it at the time and thought, that was strange, and then you moved on. Chosen one, it's time to stop moving on from that. Think about the people who tried to turn others against you, and somehow, inexplicably, the others didn't turn. Think about the version of events that was supposed to make you look bad, and instead collapsed under its own weight the moment someone actually looked closer. Think about how many times an attack aimed directly at you missed its target in a way that felt almost too clean to be an accident. Attacks like that don't usually fail cleanly. Most attacks land at least a little. Most rumors stick to something. Most sabotage does at least some damage before it's stopped. Yours didn't, not the way it should have, and that's the part worth sitting with. Imagine this: an arrow fired with perfect aim toward a target, and halfway through its flight, an unseen hand reaches out and shifts it a single inch off course, just enough that it misses everything it was meant to hit. The archer stands there confused, checking their bow, checking their form, unable to understand why a shot that should have connected simply didn't. They'll never see the hand that moved it. They'll only feel the confusion of a plan that made perfect sense on paper and somehow failed in the air. Think about how many people who tried to come after you eventually gave up, not because you fought back, but because the effort simply stopped being worth it for reasons they couldn't articulate. Their own resolve seemed to leak out of them the closer they got to actually harming you. That's not a common experience for someone trying to hurt another person. Usually resolve builds with proximity. Around you, it seemed to do the opposite, again and again, in ways none of them could explain to themselves afterward. You might ask why certain people who clearly wanted to hurt you never quite managed to land the hit they were aiming for. Why their confidence going in never matched the outcome coming out. Because someone was quietly deflecting, 1 degree at a time, just enough to keep the damage from ever becoming permanent. He didn't stop people from trying. He let them try, because trying and failing taught you things that never trying at all never could have. But he made sure trying never turned into succeeding in the ways that would have actually broken you. That's not luck. That's a hand steady enough to redirect without ever being seen doing it. Number 8. The nights you thought you were alone. This is the part that might hurt the most, so sit with it gently. There were nights you cried yourself to sleep, convinced nobody in the world cared whether you made it to morning. Nights you sat in silence with a weight so heavy you didn't know how to name it. Nights you whispered into the dark, half prayer, half surrender, asking if anyone was even listening. Someone was listening, not in a way you could hear, not in a way that showed up as a text message or a knock on the door, but in a way real enough that you're still here to remember those nights, instead of having become a casualty of them. Think about the lowest point you can remember, the one you still don't talk about with most people. You made it through that, not because the pain wasn't real, it was, but because something kept you tethered to the next morning, even when you couldn't find a reason to want it yourself. That tether didn't come from nowhere. Imagine this. A ship anchored in a storm so violent, the crew can't even see the chain holding them steady. All they feel is the pull, the resistance, the strange sense that despite the chaos around them, they aren't actually drifting toward the rocks the way they should be. They credit the ship's design. They credit their own skill at the wheel. They never see the anchor doing the real work beneath the surface, in water too dark to see into. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from surviving something you were never meant to survive alone, and then spending years afterward wondering how you did it, unable to point to a clear reason. If you've ever looked back at your lowest season and thought, honestly, I don't know how I got through that, that confusion isn't a gap in your memory. It's the shape of help you weren't equipped to recognize while it was happening. You might wonder why, on your worst nights, you still woke up the next morning instead of not waking up at all. Why some invisible thread kept pulling you back from edges you got dangerously close to. Why, even in your most alone moments, some quiet part of you refused to fully let go. Because you were anchored the entire time, in a storm you didn't choose, by a hand you never saw holding the chain. He watched those nights. He didn't erase them, because some of what you learned in that darkness you needed to learn. But he made sure the darkness never became the final chapter. And chosen one, that's not a small thing. That's the entire reason you're still here to hear this now. Number 9, the test he put you through first. Before protection like this becomes permanent, it has to be earned in a way that has nothing to do with performing for an audience. He didn't test you with obvious challenges you could study for. He tested you with the ordinary, unglamorous moments nobody was watching. How you treated people who couldn't do anything for you. How you handled being wronged without becoming someone who wrongs others in return. How you kept your integrity intact in rooms where cutting corners would have been easier and nobody would have known the difference. Those were the real exams, not the big public moments, the small private ones, repeated so often they became who you are without you ever noticing you were being evaluated. Think about the times you could have taken an easy shortcut and didn't. The times you could have let bitterness win and chose grace instead, quietly, with nobody clapping for the choice. The times you kept a promise that cost you something, to someone who would never have known if you'd broken it. Those moments built the case for you long before any single dramatic event ever could have. Imagine this: a blacksmith testing a blade, not by asking it to cut through something impressive once, but by bending it, again and again, in private, checking whether it holds its shape under pressure nobody else will ever see. A blade that only performs when watched is worthless in the moments that matter most. A blade that holds its integrity in private is the only kind worth carrying into anything real. Consider how many of those tests you passed without a single witness, without a single person ever knowing you were even being tested at all. Nobody handed you a scorecard. Nobody told you the stakes. You just kept choosing the harder, quieter, more honest option, over and over, for reasons you couldn't always explain even to yourself. That kind of consistency isn't accidental, and it isn't free. It's built one invisible choice at a time, and every one of those choices was noticed, even when no person in the room could have noticed it. You might wonder why your hardest seasons always seem to arrive in private, without witnesses, without applause waiting on the other side. Because that's exactly where character gets built, and exactly where it gets tested. He wasn't watching to catch you failing. He was watching to see if you'd hold your shape when nobody but you would ever know either way. You passed, chosen one, quietly, repeatedly, without ever knowing you were being measured. And that's precisely why the protection around you never wavered. There's a strange kind of grief in realizing you were graded on tests you didn't know you were taking, tests nobody will ever hand you the results of directly. But there's also a strange kind of relief in it. It means every hard, invisible choice you made when no one was watching actually counted for something. None of it was wasted on an empty room. The room was never as empty as it looked. Someone was grading the quiet version of you the entire time, and the quiet version of you kept passing without needing an audience to do it. Number 10. The moment the mask started to slip. For years, none of this showed itself directly. But lately, something has been shifting. You've felt it, even if you haven't had the words for it. A strange sense that things are lining up too well to be accidental. A pull toward pieces of your past that suddenly make more sense than they used to. A quiet suspicion that maybe, just maybe, you weren't as alone in all of it as you always assumed. That feeling isn't random either. It's the mask starting to slip, on purpose, because the season for silent protection is beginning to shift into something new. Not because the protection is ending, but because you're finally ready to understand it, instead of simply benefiting from it without knowing. Think about why you're even watching this right now. Why this message, at this exact point in your life, is landing the way it's landing. That's not coincidence either. That's the same hand that's been quietly clearing your path for years, now quietly clearing the fog from your understanding. Imagine this, a curtain that's been drawn for the entire length of a performance, hiding the crew who moved every set piece exactly where it needed to be. As the final act begins, the curtain doesn't fall all at once. It lifts slowly, inch by inch, letting the audience see just enough to understand that none of what they watched happened by accident. That's where you're standing right now. The curtain is lifting, not because the show is over, but because you've earned the right to see how much work went into it. Notice how, lately, old memories keep resurfacing with new context attached to them. A moment from years ago that you always filed under lucky break suddenly reads differently when you look at it with everything else you now understand. That recontextualizing isn't nostalgia. It's clarity finally catching up to events that always meant more than you were able to see at the time they happened. You might be asking, why now? Why, after all these years of silence, does any of this suddenly feel visible? Because understanding your own protection changes how you carry yourself moving forward. And he's decided you're finally ready to walk differently, knowing what's actually been behind you the whole time. Number 11. Why now? Why this season? Timing like this is never accidental. If the mask is slipping now, it's because something in your life is about to require you to know this. Maybe you're standing at a decision that needs more courage than you've had access to before. Maybe you're circling a doubt about your own worth that's gotten loud enough to drown out everything else. Maybe you simply needed, at this exact point, to stop believing the lie that you did all of this completely alone. Protection reveals itself at the moment it needs to be believed, not a moment before. If he had told you everything 10 years ago, it wouldn't have landed the same way. You needed the years of silence first to build the proof, so that when the reveal finally came, it wouldn't feel like a nice story. It would feel like an undeniable pattern, stacked high enough that you can't talk yourself out of seeing it. Think about where you are right now, what you're facing, what you're about to decide. This message isn't reaching you in a random week. It's reaching you in the exact week you needed to remember you were never doing any of this solo. Imagine this. A soldier handed a letter from home right before the hardest part of a long march. Not the easiest part. Not because the timing is cruel, but because that's exactly the moment the letter will matter enough to change how the next mile gets walked. That's this message. That's this season. It's arriving exactly when it needs to, not a mile too early. Whatever is sitting on the edge of your life right now, the decision you're avoiding, the fear you haven't said out loud, the version of yourself you're afraid to become because it means leaving something familiar behind, this understanding was always meant to arrive right before you needed it most, not after. That's not comfort talking. That's the same precision that's been running underneath your entire story, showing up again, right on schedule. You might wonder what's coming next in your life, that required you to know this now. You may not fully see it yet, but trust that the timing of understanding your own protection is never wasted timing. It's aimed the same way everything else about this has been aimed, quietly, from the very beginning. Number 12. What he saw in you that you couldn't see in yourself. Here's the truth underneath all of it. He didn't protect you because you were flawless. He protected you because he saw something worth protecting long before the world agreed with him. He saw a person who kept choosing integrity in rooms that rewarded the opposite. He saw someone who kept showing up for others, even while quietly starving for the same energy in return. He saw potential stacked under pain, the kind of potential that only becomes visible to people who know exactly what they're looking for. You've spent years doubting your own worth, wondering if you were really worth the effort, worth the second chances, worth being chosen at all. And the entire time, someone had already answered that question for you, long before you ever asked it out loud. Think about the parts of yourself you've been hardest on, the mistakes you replay at 2 in the morning, the moments you're convinced disqualify you from anything good. He saw those moments too, and he protected you anyway, because worth was never about being flawless in the first place. It was about being real, consistent, and quietly unwilling to become someone you'd be ashamed of, even when nobody was checking. Imagine this: a gardener who plants something in soil everyone else called barren, not because they're naive, but because they can see nutrients beneath the surface that nobody else bothered to check for. Years later, when something finally grows there, the crowd calls it a miracle. The gardener just calls it patience, applied to something they always knew was capable of more than it looked like on the surface. Think about how many people looked at the same version of you that he looked at. The tired one, the unfinished one, the one still figuring things out, and walked past without a second thought. He didn't walk past. He stopped, looked closer, and decided that what looked unfinished to everyone else looked like something still becoming to him. That distinction, unfinished versus becoming, is the whole difference between the people who gave up on you and the one who never did. You might ask why you, specifically, out of everyone he could have chosen to watch over. Because he wasn't looking for perfect, he was looking for real. And chosen one, that's exactly what he found in you, long before you found it in yourself. There's a quiet kind of grief in that too, realizing how many years you spent trying to earn something that was never actually withheld. You don't have to keep auditioning for a worth that was already settled long ago. That striving served its purpose. It built the discipline and the depth you carry now. But it was never the price of admission. It was just the shape your growth happened to take. The decision about your worth was made before you understood there was even a decision to be made. Number 13. The weight he carried so you wouldn't have to. There's a kind of protection that isn't about stopping the bad thing from happening. It's about making sure the bad thing, when it does happen, doesn't cost you everything. That's the harder kind. That's the kind that doesn't look like a miracle from the outside. It looks like survival, plain and quiet. And nobody ever thinks to ask what made survival possible in the first place. Think about the losses in your life you actually had to live through. The ones that weren't deflected, the ones that landed fully and hurt exactly as much as they were supposed to. He didn't stop those. He couldn't. And honestly, he wasn't meant to, because some pain is the price of becoming who you are now. But look closer at what happened after each of those losses. Look at how you were never left completely without a way forward. A person showed up, a resource appeared. A small mercy landed at the exact moment you needed it to keep going. Not to stop hurting, just to keep going. Imagine this: a man carrying an injured friend across a battlefield, not shielding him from every bullet, because that isn't possible, but making sure that when the friend falls, he falls somewhere survivable instead of somewhere fatal. That's the choice he's been making for you over and over. Not a life free of wounds, a life where the wounds never got to be the ending. You might ask why some of your pain was allowed to happen at all, if he was capable of stopping it. Because a life with no pain in it produces someone who has never been tested, and untested people don't grow the kind of depth that makes them worth protecting in the first place. He let the fire touch you. He just made sure it never consumed you completely. That distinction, touch versus consume, is the whole architecture of what's been happening around you your entire life. That's the weight he carried, not the absence of hard things, the presence of a flaw beneath every fall, even the ones that felt bottomless while you were falling through them. Number 14, the truth you carry forward. So here's where this lands, chosen one. Someone has been protecting you since day one, quietly softening blows, quietly clearing paths, quietly working through people who never understood why they helped you when it cost them something. He never asked for your gratitude, and he's not asking for it now. He's simply letting you finally see the pattern, because it's time you carried yourself like someone who was never actually unguarded, not even during the years it felt that way. This doesn't mean the road ahead gets easier. It means you get to walk it differently, not desperate for proof that you matter, because you already have the proof, stacked up over years, in every coincidence, every closed door that quietly reopened, every attack that mysteriously missed. Not afraid of walking alone, because you've never actually walked alone, not once, not for a single season of your entire life. Think about how you'll carry yourself tomorrow, knowing this. Not arrogant, not untouchable in the reckless sense, just steadier, just a little less afraid of the dark, because you finally understand that the dark was never as empty as it felt. Imagine this. Someone walking through a forest at night, terrified of every sound, every shadow, until they finally learn there's been a quiet guide walking a few steps behind them this entire time, letting them build their own courage while never actually letting them get lost. Once they know that, the same forest doesn't feel the same anymore. Not because the forest changed, because they did. That's you, right now. The forest hasn't changed. You have. You walked in believing you were unguarded, and you're walking out knowing you never were. Carry this quietly, the same way it was given to you. Not as proof to wave in front of people who doubted you, not as a shield to hide behind, instead of doing your own work, but as a foundation, something steady underneath everything else you build from here. You don't need to convince anyone else that this is true. You only needed to finally hear it yourself, once, clearly, so that the next hard season doesn't feel like the first one did. He's been watching over you since day one. He just never said it. And now, chosen one, you finally understand why. If this reached the part of you that needed it, drop 77 in the comments and let it be known that you received this. Hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who's been carrying the same lonely belief you just let go of. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care and goodbye.